Hello, my beautiful friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Let's Get Deeper podcast. We're still running with the car chats vibe, and obviously still running with the raw, one take, unfiltered kind of vibe as well. I have my notes here on my phone as per usual. And before we jump into this episode, I just want to say I'm prefacing this, take everything with a grain of salt. This is purely based off what I'm moving through. 10 weeks now into off season. Also, before I get into the episode, I want to say a big thank you to all of the new faces here. I have noticed you guys. I have gotten a lot of DMs recently on Instagram, so I wanted to say a huge thank you for people joining in along on my journey more closely through Instagram, and just for the love. Like, I've been feeling it, and I've seen your messages. I've been in conversation with new people, and it really and truly means the world to me. So just want to say a big shout out to you guys. If you're joining for the first time, welcome. And if you're tuning back in, welcome back. I love you so much. This week's episode is in light of how I've been feeling. I'm now 10 weeks post-show / into my off-season after getting feedback from my pro debut to build muscle. Many people will know that throughout prep, your body goes through a bunch of different things. Hormonally, you're probably not going to be looking at normal hormone function. If you are one of the people, like an athlete who doesn't lose, a female athlete who doesn't lose their period throughout their prep, props to you, girl, because that is wonderful. It's a sign that your body is still working efficiently. I, however, I'm not one of those people. In my first prep, when I turned pro, lost my cycle for 5 months, and I have just after 5 months again. This is day 3 of my cycle, and I'm so happy to have it back. I feel connected to my body. I feel in some ways like more nurturing, more sensitive, more soft, but also a lot more connected to my inner strength as well. So in light of this, I sort of wanted to talk about what I've been moving through. And this is both a life update, but also insight into the sort of trap that we can fall into, where there is a very fine line between passion and excellence and obsession. And I want to drop you in, start this episode dropping you in what I was moving through, what I was experiencing in the lead up to getting my cycle. I wasn't expecting to get my period back for a while, honestly. I wasn't not expecting it, but I was just like, it'll happen when it happens, right? But throughout my off season, as a professional athlete, I've sort of leveled up the way that I carry myself throughout off season. Off season was always a very structured time for me anyway. I've obviously been in the sport now for just over a year, but when you turn into a professional athlete in your first season, there are certain things that you're like, okay, damn. So now I'm gonna take myself more seriously, right? And that's something that I have come to the realization that I have sort of taken on without realizing that to take on a certain identity in what you do rather than who you are can be a slippery slope. Anyway, leaning into this week's check-in, because I'm now fortnightly check-ins with my coach, I had realized I've been back in Melbourne for 2 weeks now. I am seeing there's a lot of social events. Mother's Day had just been, and my normal prescribed 1 off-plan meal a week actually turned into 2 off-plan meals in the week just been. And these are choices that I'm comfortable with. But in the back of my mind, I had this thought where I was like, oh, I've been sloppy. I've been, not as adherent as what I normally am. And when you are, like I said, taking on a certain identity for yourself And for me, it is like the professional athlete, because I know that I have long-term goals in this sport. I know that I'm going to make it to the Olympia one day, because I won't stop until I do. But in order to do that, life needs to be sort of structured. I need to continually put one foot in front of the other and make a choice to go after this goal. And consistency is the thing that's going to do that. However, there needs to be balance to that. And that's something that I'll talk about in this episode, and something that I've realized through my check-in with my wonderful coach, who told me things that I didn't even realize I needed to hear. Anyway, I had my extra off-plan meal the week just been. Didn't realize I was PMSing. I also felt like a little bit more emotional than usual, but as well, like heavy grief days. Just because it's been 1 year since I lost my sister to suicide doesn't mean that heavy grief days don't just like come and hit you out of nowhere. So rather than trying to be like, oh, why is this happening? Could it be my period? Could it be this? I've come to a point now in my life where I'm like, I surrender to what comes up for me, what feelings, what thoughts, what emotions come up. I surrender to it rather than looking for reasons or logic behind why. I just allow them to be. And that's a beautiful thing. But throughout the last week, where I had, more social events, where I had a beautiful girls' night with some girlfriends who I hadn't seen, because they're obviously based here in Australia and I've been living in Bali. We had a beautiful pizza night together, and I had initially sort of intended to track. But you know what? I was like, I got to the girls' night and I was like, I just want to spend time present with my girlfriends, and I'll take that as my off-plan meal this week. Mother's Day rolls around. I brought and packed my food to enjoy with my family while they had their Mother's Day stuff with their Mother's Day feed. And then I got to Mother's Day and I was like, I'm in off season. Can I realistically eat what I have packed? Yes. Can I realistically eat what's here and track it? Yes. But then I looked around and I was like, I actually feel like the choice I want to make right now is not with an athlete hat on. This is with less about what I do and more about who I am. And in that moment, I was like, I have two choices here: stay on track and have take my off-plan meal that I had the other day, or don't stay off track, but back my decision to do that and connect with my family, eat mindfully. And that's what I chose to do. So heading into the check-in with my coach, I was like, look, I had an extra off-plan meal this week. Have I not been as adherent as I normally am in my off season? Yeah, I haven't been as adherent, but am I content with these decisions? Yes. And I was like, any feedback you have on that, whether you feel like I need to pull up, if you need to pull me up on my mentality, if you feel like I need to refocus, or let me know your thoughts. When it comes to coaching, I trust my coach, and it's a collaborative experience. So the tension for me between athlete mode and human mode can sometimes create these internal dialogues where I'm like, oh, I've been sloppy. I've been not locked in enough. However, I got my check-in feedback back. I was watching through my Loom video, and Scott, my wonderful coach, who has been in the industry for a very long time, coaching for a very long time, all different kinds of athletes, but mostly bikini and fit model athletes, said to me, Charlie, you say you've been sloppy. Have you been sloppy or have you been living? And I was like, oh, that was a statement I didn't realize I needed to hear. He acknowledged the fact that, yes, in order to do well in something, you need to consistently make choices to show up for yourself. In saying that, 100% adherence, 100% of the time, is more indicative, actually, of disordered eating rather than attributes of a great athlete. And he sort of touched on the fact that in order to remain in a sport that requires so much from you and so much discipline, so much consistency, sometimes prioritizing life and humanness over tracking and being an athlete and a bodybuilder and a perfect bodybuilder and athlete is necessary. And he argued that an extra off-plan meal this week was actually maybe good for me. And I was like, oh, that was the validation I didn't realize that I needed. Not to say that like external validation is what excuses or permits you to do a certain thing, because I already felt quite content in my decision. But in order to sort of stay long term in something, like I said, that does require you to be locked in, does require discipline, you need to be able to switch gears at times, and you need to be able to have a life outside of your passions, because like I said in the intro, there is a very fine line between passion and drive and ambition and obsession and unhealthy obsession, which ends up leaning to resentment and potentially burnout in a certain sport. And that's why I hear a lot of people talk about the fact that once they started bodybuilding, they felt like they were tunnel visioned in that. And while it's, I think, in a society and also a space in bodybuilding that does support the hustle, the grind, the discipline, the constant progression, and like the focus and the hard ass kind of like stick to your guns stuff, it can be really hard to take a step back and like zoom out and be like, okay, there is more to life than this. But in saying that, it's okay that there's going to be seasons where I want to go all in on something. The myth of 100% adherence, when obsession with 100% turns into something where I think it could be less beneficial than what we might be led to believe, is when in the circumstance that I was in, or maybe circumstances that you might find yourself in, there's times where you might be in a place that you're not going to see yourself in again for a while. Like for me, I know that Mother's Day this year was a really special time for me. I got to cook with my family and do all of this stuff that I was like, I actually don't know the next time I'm going to be able to do this. Not just because I intend on being in prep for a long time next year and shooting for show after show, but also the fact that my family isn't getting any younger. I'm not getting any younger. The moment that we're in right now, we're not going to get back. And I think living abroad also brings a certain level of awareness to the fact that when you have time to connect with people you love, there are going to be times where you do prioritize tracking, and there would have been no wrong or right for me in that moment to either eat my meal prep, and I would have still been able to connect. But there's also no wrong in eating intuitively, enjoying the food that we've all cooked together, and being present and connecting over nostalgia of like cooking and eating together. But I think that social media, and I'm not going to say, like, I'm not going to point fingers, because I know that me documenting my prep, and I know that when I am in my prep bubble, I'm extremely focused. I'm extremely tunnel visioned, and it's almost like a little switch will flip in my brain where I'm like, okay, nothing else, like, nothing can tempt me. When I'm in prep, I could be around like all of my favorite foods, but there's just focus there. And I think that that's a wonderful attribute to have as an athlete. And it's a wonderful attribute to have in prep. It's extremely helpful when you're working towards something short term. And I say short term because my 16 weeks doesn't sound like a short period of time, but in the reality of like what life is, I know that if I'm doing a 16-week prep and I'm shooting for a particular show, I have a short period of time where I lock in, and then you have to be able to switch gears to be able to embrace all that life is outside of your passions and outside of the tunnel vision stuff. And I think that social media has sort of contributed to that perfect prep culture where it glorifies rigidity. And if you're not completely perfect, then you're failing. And that's a really slippery slope and a dangerous place to be when we as humans are not meant to be like robots. And while yes, in order to be excellent at something, you have to do things that other people aren't willing to do. By the same token, I really and truly believe, and this is all, like I said in the beginning of the episode, prefaced it with, this is just my experience, but I know in myself that if I was to be completely locked in 24/7 in off season with just my one off-plan meal a week, with no ability to actually adapt and be flexible. And when I say adapt and be flexible, I mean maybe going out for an impromptu coffee and tracking that in roughly. It doesn't have to be perfect. Or going and getting like a pastry with a girlfriend, tracking that in roughly and accounting for that in my day, of course, not necessarily like going out and like eating a bunch of stuff and not like planning ahead. But there also might be times where I don't want to account for certain things, and that can be taken as my off-plan meal. It's about finding balance, and the right balance is going to depend on like who you are as a person, and it's all very individual. But the question that I ask myself in times where I'm like, should I do this or that? I will ask honestly, is this sustainable for the next 5 to 10 years? If I live every single day with the mentality that I have currently, is this going to be sustainable? Prep is a different story, because prep is, like I said, it's a short-term thing. But I encourage you, if you find yourself finding it difficult to switch gears between prep and off-season, or you're struggling to navigate like certain things, and whether it means like you're a good versus bad athlete, or whether you're worthy versus not worthy, ask yourself these questions, and I'm sure that it will, and I hope it does give you the clarity that you're looking for. Just ask, is it sustainable for the next 5 to 10 years if you do this? Or are you going to feel resentful? Are you going to feel like you've missed out? Are you going to like look back and regret? Because that is the last thing that you want to do as well. And I think that that's why accountability and ownership is so important. And that's where in Mother's Day, that experience that I had where I was like, I could track and I could eat my food, but I knew in hindsight, if I looked back, I would have been like, damn, I wish like in 5 years' time, if I looked back and went, I wish I had have enjoyed that meal with my family members who may not be here anymore. And that, compared to staying on track, for me felt more important and more impactful. So ask yourself as well, is this behavior to be completely rigid 100% of the time and not be able to adapt, is that a sign of a champion? Is that a sign of like the person that I want to be? Or is it fear that is masked as like discipline and the things that we tend to glorify? The important distinction I think to make is that precision is really important when needed. And when I say when needed, I'm talking about in prep, in phases where when you're working towards something. This is, everything I'm saying right now applies to a more flexible sort of like lifestyle, off-season-esque kind of period in your life. Precision when needed is incredible. But like I've been saying, precision versus rigidity and inability to actually be flexible in the times where maybe that is flexibility is more preferable and more beneficial for you long term. Being able to make that distinction is incredibly important, and only you can do that. Like only you know that in yourself. I have clients who I'm working with at the moment who we're learning through our work together what works for them, what dictates when they need to use their like precision-based thinking, and when they need to like switch gears a little bit into being more flexible and more soft and more gentle with themselves. And I also want to say that you can both be in the precision and discipline and also be soft at the same time, as much as some people might think that that is not a possibility. Two things can exist at once, and two things can be true. Multiple things can be true at once. Longevity requires, in my opinion, expansion and not constriction. So what I mean by that is if bodybuilding becomes your entire identity and your goal your end point becomes your entire identity, then when you reach that milestone, who are you? A lot of people feel lost after they, finish their prep or they finish their show, because they're like, oh, what do I do with my time now? Because if I'm not doing cardio, if I'm not restricting my diet, if I'm not doing this, people lose themselves completely to the process. And in the moment, that's great. Like in the moment, to be able to lose yourself in the process and be completely in a flow and completely like immersed in the experience is wonderful, because it means you learn so much about yourself. But you do have to have the ability to step outside of that too. If your self-worth is only in your physique, you are going to struggle post-show. And that's something that I'm also learning, is that I'm so glad that before stepping into bodybuilding, I did a lot of identity work where I was like, okay, who am I outside of what I do? Because who you are versus what you do are very, very different things. I remember I spent a lot of time stripping back certain things, not necessarily stopping doing things that I enjoyed, but I was like, okay, if the gym disappeared and I woke up one day and I was a paraplegic, who would I be without the gym? If X experience happened, or if this was taken away, where a lot of my habits and a lot of my routines and a lot of the things that I do would not be a possibility anymore, who am I? And I really urge you to ask that question to yourself, because that doesn't necessarily mean that you stop doing the things that you're passionate about, or you stop doing the things that light you up, or you stop pursuing things, because goals and direction are extremely important in life. It gives us purpose. It gives us that sense of like something to wake up for. It gives us excitement and zest for life, and that's wonderful. But don't think for a second that the outcomes of your pursuits, or your pursuits themselves and the things that you do, make up who you are. Because your habits and your routines and the way you think and the way you feel, all of those things contribute in a sense to make up you. But underneath that, what is your identity? Because it's so much deeper than your outputs, and it's so much deeper than the external. The goal is not to shrink your life around bodybuilding. And I want to say that plain and simple. The goal is to build bodybuilding into a full life. And that for me is something that I'm now learning more fully in off season, because like I said, I have that sort of switch, that mental switch that flips on for me. When I'm in my prep, I'm like, all right, we are all in discipline, softness, rest, regulation, like doing all the things, but I'm very, very focused. When it comes to off season, where there is more flexibility, I still have direction. I know I'm building muscle. I know I have certain goals for the next time, that I'm setting myself up in a good way to be able to take on the next prep. But for me, being able to set myself up well for the next prep also involves seasons of flexibility. And I know that this sounds interesting, like this is an interesting analogy, but I look at the way nature works and I'm like, nature is not a constant summer. Obviously in some parts of the world, climates are hotter all the time and colder all the time than in other parts of the world. But nature is very, it goes in cycles. And I believe that as humans, we are the same. We are not meant to be the same, like living the exact same day in, day out. There is meant to be variance. There is meant to be times of rest and more times of pursuit. There is meant to be more times of downtime and softness, and then times where we go full steam ahead, but without the times where we pull back and like lean more into ourselves and allow for that flexibility. For me personally, I know that the best thing I can do to set myself up for my next prep and my next competing season is to allow life to exist outside of bodybuilding, because being able to like allow life to be around my pursuit now then energizes me for the time when I'm like, all right, I'm ready, I'm motivated to lock in. And this will help you in everything in your life, in life outside of bodybuilding. It'll help you in your relationships, your business, your community, travel, laughter, experiences, and adventure. All of these things are important to your life. And I think that in a society that does glorify success and external outcomes, it can be really difficult to go against the grain. It can be really difficult to lean into an alternative perspective without going too far in the opposite direction, because I think that we live in a society that is built on intensity. We are a dopamine-ridden society, which often exacerbates our tendencies to go all or nothing. And being able to learn how to be flexible, being able to learn how to adapt, being able to learn how to hold two things at once and be able to work towards your goals, but also have a bit of fun and be able to accept that this might be a reality, but also on the flip side, this could just as much be true as the reality that is in front of you. I think that is an important skill, not just in competing or your pursuits or as an athlete, but as a woman and as a human. So I feel like this episode is quite philosophical and quite technical, and there's a lot of layers to it. It's more so just like a little bit of a yap and internal, like me sharing my internal dialogue of what's been happening for me at the moment. I feel like in hindsight, knowing now as well that when I got my period, I was like, oh, that checks out, because as much as I really enjoy being locked in and I love the lifestyle that I live and having my one-off planned meal a week, being able to spend social time and like have extra things outside of my prescribed one-off planned meal a week actually made me feel motivated to lock back in, because I was like, oh, I feel energized by that social time I had where I was fully present. I was not like on my phone trying to work out my calories or anything like that. I was just like, I was with my family. I was with my friends. And it made me feel like, damn, I'm energized. I feel like that was such a beautiful experience. And my nervous system relaxed. It allowed my body to come back to baselines. It allowed my body to go back to normal hormone functions. And I think that's something to be said for that as well, is allowing yourself to pull back and like relax and surrender a little bit. While short-term that could actually be the less comfortable thing to do when it's not familiar, long-term, it has so many benefits for you. I want to, with the last 5-ish or so minutes, I want to share what I feel like builds an elite athlete. And in my notes here, I've written that I feel like we need to reframe what an elite athlete looks like. It isn't obsessive, it isn't isolated, it's not miserable, and it's not hyperfixated. I see so many things. It's sort of being phased out now, which is great. But I had seen so many things about bodybuilding being like a solo sport, and you got to like lock in and like isolate yourself, and it looked very terrible, to be honest. Like, it looked like a shitty time. Do you know what elite is? An elite athlete is a regulated person, someone who is secure, flexible when appropriate, and able to zoom out. And discipline is powerful. There is nothing that is tainting that. Discipline is extremely powerful, but rigidity is fragile. And I think that athletes who can handle life and prep at the same time are the ones who stay longer in the sport. The ones who can sacrifice everything, and the ones who do sacrifice everything eventually learn to resent the sport and never come back to it. And that's where I think that it is important to be able to have that balance. So before I leave you, I want to give some practical guidance for you guys as listeners. So these are your tools. Number 1, audit your identity. I want you to ask if bodybuilding or X pursuit that you have, because I know that a lot of you listening are in the bodybuilding space, but I also know that a lot of you listening don't do bodybuilding and you have your own pursuits, but you have your pursuits with the same intensity as what bodybuilding requires. So if bodybuilding or X pursuit was removed tomorrow, who are you? And if that question creates a sense of panic in you, that is information. Number 2, ask, is this discipline or is it fear? Before saying no to something social or something that might make you feel like you're on the back foot of your pursuit or your goal, ask, am I protecting my goal or am I protecting control? Number 3, think in 5-year frames. So would you rather be 1% tighter this week or 1% more adherent this week, or still love the sport in 5 years' time? Like, ask yourself, and like I said, I know 2 things can exist at once and you can have it all, but you can't have it all at once. And sometimes being able to zoom out and ask yourself those questions consistently enough, you can understand that, like, maybe at one time you might rather be 1% more adherent, and another time you might prefer the opposite, and that's okay. You're a human being, like, that is normal. But zooming out regulates that sense of sort of urgency and the pressure. Number 4, redefine slipping or being sloppy in my case, because one off-plan meal or an extra off-plan meal doesn't equal self-sabotage. And one social evening doesn't equal lack of commitment or lack of discipline around your goal. It might actually mean that you're actually secure enough to live while pursuing the things that you want to pursue. So to circle back and to end this episode, I just want to say that I realized this week that longevity does require a sense of emotional maturity. It requires trusting that one meal or one extra meal or one social event doesn't erase years of discipline. Okay, you have to do things consistently over a long period of time. And while every action has a reaction and things will have a result, absolutely, it requires knowing that building a life around your goals makes you a stronger athlete and not a weaker one. So the athletes that I've realized have lasted in the sport are the ones who don't need their pursuit or their goals or bodybuilding to actually be their entire world and for it to completely consume their life. So some reminders I want to leave you with are that you are allowed to care deeply, you're allowed to be disciplined, and you are also allowed to be human. And those things are not always opposite. With all of this being said, my loves, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I know it has been kind of a roundabout one, all over the place, and I've taken you in the ins and outs and the ups and downs of my internal dialogue in my brain. But I hope that you found it to be insightful. I hope that in sharing my experiences, 10 weeks now into off season has been something that you can relate to, maybe something that you can take from it. And if it has been valuable, share it with a friend, share it with someone who might need it, or share it to your stories. I do see you guys doing that, and that makes me so happy. Reach out to me, let me know your thoughts. If you disagree with things, let me know your thoughts too. We're not all the same, and I really, really welcome other people's opinions as well. So all of it. I love you guys so, so much, and I will see you in the next episode.